afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to the yet another lecture of web-based decision support system for managers, business managers, and practitioners. And I am Deepak Philip from IIT Kanpur, and we are continuing our lecture on the application program and especially how to interconnect. So, if you look at the slide, we have seen so far that the web-based DSS has four major components. The first major component is DBMS, okay, and the second major component is we called it as MBMS, model based management system, right. So, in this we have studied something like MySQL or MariaDB, the same. And the model based management system, we studied PHP, which can build the decision models and it can also build the application program or application layer. So, these two, the DBMS and MBMS, need to talk with each other. So, in another way to think about it is, this is the interconnect. Okay. So, this interconnect implies that DBMS should communicate with MBMS. Okay. So, we can replace this with as MySQL or MariaDB should talk with PHP or should communicate with PHP. Okay. So, because you are using PHP to make this connection happen. So, that is what we are trying to study or take a quick overview in the today's lecture. And this interconnection, this drives the backend communication that ensures data driven decisions. Okay. To make the decision, you need data, and how do you get the data? You get it from the DBMS, and once you get it from the DBMS, then you can use the data to drive your decision. So, how is that going to happen is what we are going to see today. So, what is MySQL MariaDB? Quick refresher, not going to spend too much of a time. We already spent time on this, we already seen SQL, many aspects we already gone through. Okay. It is the MySQL is the most popular open source database system, and MySQL you can read it as MariaDB, because now MySQL is now bought by Oracle. So, even though the MariaDB is the open source fork of MySQL, it is the most popular open source database system. And in the MySQL or MariaDB, the data is stored in the database objects called tables. There are different tables. We saw how do we create the table. So, remember the create table syntax and etc. We were gone through create table, query table, select table, all those kind of things. So, what is a table? A table, or another way to talk about it, is a relation. Okay. We have talked about that also. What is a relation, what is a object, what is a tuple, all these things we have mentioned. So, a table is a collection of related data entries and it consists of columns and rows. So, remember a database table will be something like this, okay. And each one of these columns, they were the attributes. Okay. Columns are the attributes and rows are the tuples. Okay. So, or the entity, an instance of an entity goes into the row. We already seen that. So, then why we use database? Briefly we said that database, they are very useful or they are very powerful when storing information categorically. Okay. You want to classify it and store the information, so that is why you use the databases. And most of the time a database consists of one or more tables. So, tables or entities. Okay. We can think about it that way. So, most of the time the database has more than one table. Now, some of the MySQL or MariaDB facts we need to look into again as a quick refresher. The great thing about this one is that it can be scaled down, easily scalable, scaled down to support embedded database application. It allows, so in another way to say is allows for plenty of simplification. We can call it as dummy down. Okay, keep it simple and stupid, that kind of a thing. So it can be very easily scalable, and because of this scalability, this beautiful scalability and this reputation of the scalability, that many people believe that MySQL can handle only small to medium sized systems. MySQL is actually a large, okay, it can, or MySQL or MariaDB both can handle enterprise level systems. They are designed to handle enterprise level systems, but unlike Oracle or Microsoft SQL Server or something like that, the beautifully scales down. You can make simplest applications out of it, whereas in Oracle or Microsoft SQL Server, that's not easily possible. So that's why, because people use it to make simple applications, people believe that it can only handle small and medium sized database, small and medium sized systems. So the main truth is that MySQL or MariaDB is the de facto standard database. Okay, is the basic database that for websites that supports huge volumes of data, both at the end users, stores data and it's also do analysis. So Friendster, Yahoo, Google, eBay, another one is eBay, all these things are driven, or the backend database is MySQL. So that says it can handle very large systems on one side and simpler systems on the other side. And another beauty of MySQL we should understand is MySQL integrates with PHP or MySQL or MariaDB, either one. Okay, both of them have very good seamless integration with PHP. So in another way is that many built-in functions readily available. So which means makes it easy for the programmer to build applications. You don't have to worry too much how to do this. Okay, you can easily build the application. So the first thing you need to do is, before accessing the data in a database using PHP, before accessing the database, first you need to establish a connection to the database. So PHP provides you a built-in function called MySQL connect function. MySQL connect also connects with MariaDB. You don't have to change this, it's the same thing, right? So the MySQL connect, this is a function, as I told you earlier. Okay, it's a built-in function. You don't need to code the function, it's already coded for you, pre-done for you. You just need to call the function. Okay, so the MySQL connect function, the format is, this is the function name. Okay, and these are the three arguments. Okay, arguments. The first one is a server name. The server name is the name of the computer server, or you can call it as IP address, where the database is stored. The critical part is this: the server name is the name of the computer server where you are storing the database. Then the username is the username to access the database in that server, and the password is the associated password. So as I said earlier, server name is optional. If you don't give it, that's fine. It will default, there's a default value. The default value is localhost. Localhost :3306 means it will say that okay, if you are not given any server name, it assumes that wherever this local host implies that wherever the PHP script is located, the MariaDB database is in the same computer, same machine. Okay. So, it says okay, wherever the script is, it will also be at the same place. So, that is what is this localhost 3306 means. Otherwise, you give it a name to whichever server you need it to be connected to. The username is optional. So, again you need to give the username ideally. If you do not give the username, the default value is the name of the user who owns that server process. So, if I do not do anything, so whoever owns the server process, so if I am connecting to something, whatever the name it came through, it will take that and connect accordingly. And then the password is also optional. The default value is an empty null string. So, as I mentioned earlier, the username and password and the server name are required to connect to the database. This establishes the connection to the database. So, here is an example. So, this is the start of the PHP code. So, it tells Zend to parse, okay, starts the parsing. So, I have a variable called $connection con equal to MySQL connect. I call the function and some name of the server, username is root, password is ABC123, okay, for the time being. So, if the connection is successful, if this parameters is fine and the connection is successful, MySQL connect return a value called true. So, then what I am saying is that if not $connection means if the value of $connection is not true, that means I could not establish the connection, then I use the PHP function called die couldn't connect, and whatever the MySQL error, I use wrong username, wrong password, whatever it is, I print out whatever the error is. So, this will only be done if the connection establishment is failed, otherwise it will continue the remaining of the code if the connection is successful. So, that is the logic. So, this will work only if the MySQL connect function returns a false or not true. Okay. So, by default it returns true. If it does not return true, return something else, then this $connection will be not be true, and then we can print the whatever is the error. So, the die function, okay, it prints a message and exits the current script. So, whatever you are doing, die will just make sure that you do not go any forward, prints the error message and exit out. So, this is an alias of the exit function. Also the advantage is that the message whatever you want to print can be, so the function, the format of the die function is die with the whatever the message you want to print it. Then the other function that you are having is the MySQL error function, okay, and returns, what it does is it returns error description of the latest MySQL operation. So, if there is no error, it will return an empty string. If no errors, if the connection is successful, absolutely no issues, it will return an empty string. If it does not return an empty string, then that means the connection could not be established and there was an error. So, that is the important part. Now, once you establish a connection with a database, it is important that you should also close the connection. Most of the time, the connection will be closed automatically when the script ends. Most of the time. There are certain times this does not happen. Okay. So, it is a good practice to make sure that you close the connection, and to close the connection you use the MySQL close function. So, this makes sure that unnecessarily connection to the database and it will not slow down your server. So, it is a very good programming practice, okay, very good programming practice to ensure that connection to database is closed. Okay. So, if you use this connection as the variable, if that is the variable that you are going to use, then the example is MySQL close $count, which means close the connection. So, it will make sure that everything, all connections with the server, everything is database server is cut, and it will free out the resource. Now, how do you select query using PHP? So, we have seen that the select statement. Okay. So, select is an SQL 99 statement. Okay. It has its own syntax. Remember, select, then we gave attributes from table where condition. We have done this in the previous. We have seen this structure of select SQL syntax. So, the select statement is we can use it to select data from a database. From where in a database? Database table. Okay. From a specific table you can collect the data. You can even take it from database tables also. You can use join and those kind of things to do table or tables. But how do you do that with a PHP script? How do you do that within a PHP script? So, to get it in a PHP script, what you do is to execute the select query, or for that matter any query, it does not have to be select query. You use the MySQL query function. It is also a built-in function. This is also built-in. Okay. It is written, coded, tested, everything. All you need to do is just use the function. So, what this function does is, this function is capable of sending a query or command to the MySQL connection. So, you use the MySQL connection. Once you establish a connection, then you use the MySQL query to access the database, whether to run a select query or insert query or delete query, whatever the query you want to do, you use the MySQL query function. So, let us assume for the time being that there exists a table named pinfo. So, the table pinfo is something like this. Okay, personal info. Let us take that for example, with columns F name, first name, L name, okay, age, sex. Okay. So, we can have one thing called Ram Kumar, age 40, male, okay, Sita Devi 32, female, like this. Okay. And then you can have Tom Allen 59, male, like this. Okay. So, there is data, okay, in this one, right. So, you have first name, last name, age and sex as the. So, these are the attributes or columns. Okay. These are the rows or tuple or entities. Okay. Each one of them is, Ram Kumar is one entity of the personal info, Sita Devi is another entity of the personal info. So, this is the, just to refresh you, that is the case. Then the code works like this. First one is, it says PHP, you start with the PHP command, you call the MySQL connect function, and here I am giving a server name, for example, just to show mysql.ime.iitk.ac.in. So, it is one of the servers in my lab, and dphilip is the username, and there is a password. Okay. I am not going to show you what my password is, and then $count is the variable. So, it is a connection variable established. So, what it does is, the MySQL connect will go to query this server and says, here I have a username and a password. Do you have a database in which I can access these credentials work? So, this function checks, and the MySQL says, yes, I have a database and these credentials are valid. So, then if it is true, it will return an empty string. If not, it will send an error. Okay. So, then I use the die statement and the code exits here. Okay. If connection unsuccessful, okay, code exits here. Okay. It will leave out at this point. If this not, then goes to the next one. So, I will say MySQL select DB, this is to select PHP function to select a specific database associated with that connection. Okay. So, let us say in this particular database under the username dphilip and password, I have another database called dphilip. So, that is why I am connecting to the dphilip database. Okay. Let us say I have another one called student details, student underscore details, DTLS. Okay. If this was another database, so instead of dphilip, I would have used this name there. Okay. So, you basically says whichever the database you want to collect, you want to use using that particular connection, dollar connection, you specify that here in this line, so that you can connect to that database. Now, here is a dollar query, it is a string variable, and string variable it says select lname, age and sex from pinfo. So, we look into it pinfo, we are selecting lname, age and sex, these three things we are selecting, that is a query. So, you write the query in the form of a string here. Then you say dollar result is another variable, you say MySQL query and you give the variable as dollar query. So, this query gets executed right here, and so this is execution of the SQL query on the specified database selected using MySQL select DB function. So, whatever the database you selected using this query will run on that database. So, make sure that the database in which pinfo is stored is exactly the correct one. And then another important thing is the result of the query. The result of the query is returned in the form of an associative array. Okay. The data comes back in the form of an associative array. So, the result, this variable is an associative array. Okay. So, in this associative array, how will that variable will be, or how it will be stored? It will be stored in somewhat in a very weird fashion. The associative array will create something like dollar result array will be, okay, array, you have Kumar 40, okay, Kumar male M, like this, okay, and then love array, next one will be Devi, okay, something like this. Okay. So, it will store in the form of an associative array. So, all I just need to do is so to get one row out of this associative array, I need to use another function called MySQL fetch array. This is another pre-built function of PHP that extracts one record at a time from associative array. Okay. So, it fetches one line at a time or one row at a time. So, it will first take this and then take the next one, then it takes the next one, like this. Okay. And it will keep on repeating until there is no more records available. So, the dollar row variable will be one line or one record of the associative array of the result. So, use that and the dollar row will contain that, and then you say dollar row, you give the key L name. So, this is the L name, age and sex will be the key. So, that is what it is. Okay. So, L name, it will print the last name as Kumar, age it will print it, and then the sex it will print it. Okay. And then you line break and it will keep on repeating all of this. So, while dollar row is equal to MySQL fetch array result. So, if there is one row to return, then the stuff is true. So, this whole execution, this whole condition will remain true, remember. So, the while loop, this is the block of code of the while loop. and then it will run, and then when all the records are over, so then this MySQL fetch array will return in a false. So, this will return false when all records are exhausted. Okay. When all records are exhausted, it will return false, and the loop will stop and things will come out. So, you keep on seeing the results, and then once it is done, you close the connection to the MySQL database. So, that is the MySQL close connection. So, this is a simple example of how you can run the SQL in a particular database within the MySQL. So, as I mentioned earlier, the MySQL select DB function. Okay. So, one important thing that you remember this, the first this is connect to database, then select a database with the connection, okay. Then query the database, okay. Manipulate result. So, this is the order of the logic. So, in that regard, a database must be selected before a table can be queried. Okay. It's very important. So, after the connection, you have to select a database. So, the selection of the database is done with the help of MySQL select DB function. So, the MySQL DB function determines which database to be selected. So, this function sets the active MySQL database. So, using the connection, it will find, okay, this database is there, I am going to make it as the active database. The function will return true on success. If it finds, okay, there is a database like this and I can make it active, it will return true on success, or will return false on failure. It says, okay, I have no database like this, it will return the false. The format of this is MySQL select database, the name of the database and the connection. The name of the database is a required thing, you can have to specify what it is. So, this is the name of the database. Okay. And connection is optional. Okay. In this case, specified what the connection is. If it is not specified, then it will use the last opened connection. Okay. Whatever be the last opened one, it will pick it up and it will use it by default. So, it is always a better idea to specify the MySQL connection. Whichever connection you want to use, it is a better idea to specify it. Okay. Otherwise, you can get into bigger trouble sort of this. Then, as I mentioned earlier, the MySQL fetch array function, I have shown you this code, the MySQL fetch array, I have briefly explained it. So, the MySQL fetch array function returns a row from the record set as an associative array or a numeric array. So, most of the time 99% of the time you get it in the form of an associative array, because databases tables are complicated. So, each time when you call MySQL fetch array, it returns a row, one row. So, this function gets a row from the MySQL query function and returns an array on success or false on failure when there are no more rows. Okay. So, if there is a row, it returns a row on success. So, if there is this result MySQL fetch array, it will return a row if there is a record. If it is not, it will return false, and if it is false, the while loop will fail and you can get out of this. So, the syntax of this is MySQL fetch array, data and array type. If array type is not specified, MySQL both is used, both associative and numeric array. So, typically what happens is, in this code if you see, we have just MySQL fetch array result. So, we leave it to the freedom of PHP to decide whether you want to use a numeric array or an associative array. Most of the time it goes into associative array. So, after the data is retrieved, once you run this code and you retrieve the data, after you retrieve the data, the function moves to the next row in the record set. You do not have to worry, you do not increment about all this. This is all built in, tested, tried, you can just use the whole thing. So, each subsequent call to MySQL fetch array returns the next row on the record set. So, every time you call, it will return to the next row. So, once it extracts, it points to the next one, extract, point to the next one, that way, right. And the field names returned by this function are case sensitive. So, in this case, for example, if I use L name like this, okay, if this is the one that I am using as the attribute, and if I type it L name like this, I will get an error. So, make sure that whatever be the attribute name, or the column name in the table, that is what you use exactly here. So, this should exactly match column names. That is critical, because they are case sensitive. And similar way, so now we have seen is how to run a select query, and to how to input data into the database. Here is another example for that. Same way, PHP, as I said earlier, this starts the parsing, establish a connection using the MySQL connect. So, this is the connect to the database, and this is if connection cannot be established, exit, do not do anything more. Okay. If it is possible, then choose or select the database associated with the connection and make it active. Okay. So, then next one is query the database or execute the query. So, we know that there is a table called pinfo, okay, already there. So, the pinfo, you want to insert some values. So, your query is insert into pinfo. Pinfo is, this is the table name, and these are fname, lname, age and sex. These are the 4 aspects of this one, and we are saying that fname insert the value Ram, lname insert the value Manohar, age insert 35, sex insert male. That is what this whole thing is, and it says result MySQL query. So, in a select, it returns a associative array. In a insert, it does not return any associative array. It says whether the query got executed or not. So, insert means you are storing data into the database. So, once you capture values from the HTML form, you can use insert queries to store it into the database. And once the query is done, you close the connection to the database. Okay. So, once this is done, your manipulation or requirement with the connection of the database is over. So, in a general sense, this is how you can the backend integration. I just showed you 2 examples. So, select and insert. Same way you can use delete, so you can use update. Okay. I already shown you what the queries are. Using the same example, you can modify them, or you can modify these examples and try it out with your MySQL or MariaDB database, and try to see how you can actually achieve as part of your course learning. Okay. So, I have shown you select and insert, try in update and delete as you on your own, and try to make sure that this works in the backend. And if there is any doubt or other things, we will be available in the forum to help you in this regard. Thank you very much for your patient listening. Thank you.